Right. We are recording. Maybe while we're waiting, I see a few new names. If you're attending for the first time, feel free to introduce yourself. Either you can unmute yourself or you can put your info in the chat. I know several of you we've met before, but always good to know where people are coming from.
Oh,
yeah, I'm happy to chime in. My name is Rand Hagenstein, and I'm the Associate Director of Interlace Commons, which is a Vermont-based nonprofit that is spreading the good gospel on agroforestry throughout the Northeast U.S.
Oh, wow. So you're in Vermont now?
Actually, I'm in Alaska right now. I'm doing the job remotely, but
Okay.
So I've got Northwest leanings.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks for joining.
Interested to learn what's going on in the region.
Sure. Well, I see Stephanie's joined us.
Great. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. And if people trickle in, that's great. So welcome to our second get together of the year here. I do have a couple of announcements before we get started today. One announcement is that through a collaboration with the Center for Rural Livelihoods and Professor Bishaw with OSU and WSU, we have gotten some funding through the SARE Professional Development Program to create some educational resources for the Pacific Northwest around agroforestry. So over the next couple of years here, we'll be developing some webinars. We will get to host or put on agroforestry workshops or symposiums, whatever we decide to call them, one in Oregon and one in Washington. So we're going to get to do that. And we're also going to get to, which I'm really excited about, we're going to get to adapt an agroforestry manual that was originally created by the University of Missouri for agroforestry with sort of a Midwest context. So we're going to get to take that manual and adapt it to the Pacific Northwest so that we'll have a regionally specific agroforestry manual for agroforestry that can be used by technical service providers or by educators or landowners. So that's really exciting. So that's kind of up and coming in the coming years through that funding. And then the second announcement that I have today is that Agroforestry Northwest has sort of made a transition. And we are now officially a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And so this has some implications for the kind of work that we can do. It definitely allows us to widen our scope in the work that we can do around education and outreach, and broadens our scope for sure. And it also allows us to focus our work a little more independently of the various organizations that we come from. And it's also allowing us to start to be a voice for Pacific Northwest agroforestry on a more national level as well. So it's just broadening out our capacities and our abilities and our focus And so what does that mean for this work group? Well, really nothing is going to change. We absolutely intend to continue to host this work group sort of in the same manner that we've been doing for, the coming years here. So going to continue with this get together and collaboration and all of that. So yeah, that is exciting. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mark to introduce the guest speaker that we have today.
Thanks, Carrie. Welcome, everybody. So I'm going to introduce you all to our speaker, Stephanie Gutierrez, who works at EcoTrust. She is in EcoTrust in that role. She is the Forest and Community Programs Director, where she works with tribes and indigenous communities to apply indigenous knowledge systems. And recently, she, along with OSU and I believe the National Agroforestry Center and the U.S. Forest Service, recently published a Pacific Northwest Tribal Agroforestry ArcGIS story map, which I will share in a moment. And we invited her today primarily to talk about the work that she did with this project and the collaborative efforts that she is engaging with. And Stephanie, if there's anything else you'd like to add, feel free. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mark. And we do have one of the partners that I worked with in the audience today, Bodega Bashad. Thank you so much for being here. Just want to introduce Bodega as well. Or Bodega, do you want to, I don't know if you dropped it in the chat already, if you want to come off mute and just introduce yourself a little bit.
Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you, Patrick, and the team who invited me to come to this seminar. My name is Badege Bishau. I am an agroforestry expert at Oregon State University. I have taught agroforestry for many years for undergraduate and graduate students. I have also conducted many agroforestry projects here in the Pacific Northwest. So we started the Pacific Northwest Agroforestry groups, I think in 2013. And now I'm collaborating with EcoTrust, and we did one project funded by USDA National Agroforestry Center. And now EcoTrust is leading another one. Stephanie is a co-PI on that project. And we will have an inauguration meeting next week, I think. So I'm looking forward to contribute and work with the team. And also I'm a member of the agroforestry program, which Abel and the Northwest Group is leading, which we received recently a grant from SARE. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I will go ahead and share my screen here. And I'm sorry, I can't figure out how to get rid of the bookmarks. So you're going to see all of my bookmark tabs. Let me just try to hide that there. As you can see, there's a lot of EcoTrust and Spotify to get me through all of my work. Just checking, can I get a thumbs up from those who have their video on? Can you see the presentation slide deck? Great, awesome. Okay, so thanks so much, Mark, for that introduction. And so today I'm going to be talking about a collaborative project that informs this current project that is also collaborative, and it's a multi-year, 5-year Pacific Northwest focused project around building a community of practice for tribal agroforestry producers. This is my first time presenting on this to an audience. I welcome questions, and you can drop it in the chat. I can't see it right now, but I promise I'll get to it at the end with the Q&A. And so here's just a quick little overview of our talk today. I will be providing a quick introduction to EcoTrust, like who we are, who's the Forest and Ecosystem Services team, and then diving a little bit into the project that built that tribal agroforestry story map, and providing or talking a little bit about Indigenous agroforestry examples. And then finally, I'll talk a bit about where we're going, I guess, now and into the future around that building a community of practice for tribal agroforestry producers project. And hopefully I'll save some time for Q&A. So just a little bit about me. So I am the Forest and Community Program Director here at EcoTrust. I co-direct the Forest and Ecosystem Services team with my Director of Forest Technology and Analytics, David Diaz. Primarily my work portfolio is focused on Indigenous forest stewardship. So that includes managing forests for first foods, climate resilience, culturally significant plants, and also fire is a new area that we're exploring more and more, and it's very central to Indigenous forest stewardship as well, and agroforestry. We'll talk a little bit about that later. I kind of come from a variety of different backgrounds or interdisciplinary fields. I think, you know, as like an Indigenous scientist and a researcher, you know, my culture doesn't see things as, you know, fitting into these neat little boxes like Western science has, but everything's interconnected. And so I struggled for a little bit, and this is a story I feel like that a lot of Native undergraduate students and graduate students and just people in general encounter while going through Western academia. It's like you're trying to find a discipline that enables you to connect and interconnect or weave, build out a web of all of these other fields. And I found that hub for all the wheels, you know, or that web in forestry. And I'm even more excited to have been introduced to agroforestry, because I just feel like I've just had really great experiences with all the folks that I've met so far in agroforestry. And I appreciate all of your open-mindedness to maybe there's different ways of doing things. You know, things don't have to be in grids. Maybe we could look at things as mosaics and from a landscape scale. I received or earned a Master's of Forestry degree from OSU in 2020. I defended my project virtually the first week of lockdown. That was intense. Then I also went to Cal Poly Humboldt and Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. That's my dog Lucy. She's also outside of the meeting room right now. She is a Labrador Husky Retriever. I love her. She's the sweetest, best dog in the world. And yeah, if you're ever in the EcoTrust office or near Portland, you're welcome to come on, reach out, and we can go on a hike together or something. All right. So the EcoTrust entity is very complex and large, but I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about our Forest and Ecosystem Services team. We'll start there. If you want to know more about EcoTrust, you can visit our website. We've been around for about 30 years. We started working in partnership with tribes to conserve tribal forest lands. And then we've grown since then to include, I guess, some of our other teams are like mapping, data technology, food systems. We have our presence is mostly in Southeast Alaska, Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. Our forestry team primarily focuses on Northern California, Oregon, and Washington. And our team's goal is to work in partnership to advance climate smart forestry and Indigenous forest stewardship. Our team is composed of 6 folks. So we all report up to Olivia, but David and I are co-directing, or in Olivia, she oversees our program side of EcoTrust. David and I are the co-directors of the forestry team, and we also have Sarah Loreno, who's our senior forest research data scientist, Yanqui Gavin, who's our geospatial data scientist and engineer, and Jessica Douglas, who is our Indigenous storytelling and engagement fellow. And our different types of work, our different bodies of work, so the buckets, as I call them, we focus on enabling market connections in forestry, increasing access to information, actionable science, and funding resources. And we also build relationships and partnerships with tribes, Alaska Native villages, and Black, Indigenous, and POC communities, or people of color communities. Some examples of recent forest and ecosystem services teams projects include amplifying Indigenous stewardship through storytelling. We do a lot of community-centered forest planning, research, information gathering. I personally focus a lot on qualitative research methods, like needs assessments, interviews, focus groups, surveys, and gathering and collecting community input to inform our plans or management practices moving forward. So I'm going to transition into talking about the story map and the project that informed or that created the story map. So this project, and I think I joined back in 2020, I believe, or 2019. So I've been involved for a few years now. This is the Pacific Northwest Tribal Agroforestry Project. You can see our partners down at the bottom there of the presentation screen. And the story map was part of this larger project to promote innovation, knowledge sharing, and collaboration, as well as access to agroforestry resources. There was a particular focus on the Pacific Northwest tribes and outreach and engaging tribes in agroforestry practices in the Northwest. And I guess that is where I entered this project. So I was brought on to help coordinate and facilitate webinars, meetings, and a roundtable discussion for tribal agroforestry producers. So all of those activities, that's meant to just support connection among the roundtable participants from tribal agroforestry participants from across the region. The roundtable in particular, we brought together tribal agroforestry producers to discuss different opportunities, challenges, and provide examples of current tribal agroforestry practices. So both the webinar as well as that roundtable discussion informed the story map. So this is just a screenshot of the homepage of the Pacific Northwest Tribal Agroforestry Story Map. The webinar that informed this story map was linked on the slide before, and I'll give Mark these slides to share out with you all too. And that webinar was led by Frank Lake in May of 2021. And he provided examples, or he goes more in depth about examples about tribal agroforestry and what that looks like in practice, and provides more information about Indigenous fire stewardship too. And so over these next few slides here, I'm going to do my best to explain a little bit about what tribal agroforestry looks like in practice, and also how does Indigenous fire stewardship inform tribal agroforestry practices. So I think most of y'all know what agroforestry is, but I want us to look at that definition around tribal or Indigenous agroforestry. And before I dive into that definition, I just want to highlight why we say tribal and Indigenous. So I think, as most of you probably know, so tribes have unique status with the federal government. Tribes are governmental entities. Some are federally recognized, some are state recognized, some are unrecognized by both state or the federal government. In Alaska, that is a whole other different relationship. It's so in Alaska, you have Alaska Native villages and Alaska Native corporations, and they have a unique relationship with the federal government because, right, Alaska, the land was purchased after, I think, or I believe it was during the termination era. So back in the, I don't know, was it 40s, 50s? I need to check that. I'll get my numbers right. But that's just a little bit about why We use tribes, and actually I'm thinking I should probably update this to include and mention Alaska Native villages and Alaska Native corporations. Indigenous refers to the community aspect. So I am both identify as an Indigenous person. I'm also a tribal member. So it's just, you know, I think like we have also Indigenous people in Portland who are part of an intertribal community together here in Portland that are practicing agroforestry. So that's just kind of how we separate those two different terms. And this definition that's provided here, it's a working definition. It is not finalized. It may evolve in the future, but this definition was formed by the collaboration of partners that is part of the Pacific Northwest agroforestry meetings that I mentioned earlier. Oh, and I guess I'll read it. So tribal agroforestry, it includes culturally informed TEK or traditional ecological knowledge-based practices that integrate the management of trees, plants, fungi, and animals to serve the needs of Indigenous communities, tribes, and the broader society. So the main thing I want to point out there is that it's culturally informed. And then I'm sure all of you are pretty familiar with the NRCS conservation practices that are related to agroforestry. So part of the project that the story map came out of is that Frank Lake took, or Dr. Frank Lake, I should say, he took these NRCS practices, silval pasture, windbreaks, riparian buffers, alley cropping, and forest farming, and crosswalked them with what that would look like in an Indigenous context. And so in our story map, this is again a screenshot from the story map. I didn't want to try to run it live because sometimes my Zoom crashes. So I took screenshots for you all. But here you see at the center of tribal agroforestry examples is Indigenous fire stewardship. And then I guess emerging out of Indigenous fire stewardship, which is a management tool, we see silval pasture, riparian buffers, and so on and so forth. So these are the NRCS practices that we chose to crosswalk, and our story map describes them within the context of Indigenous land management in the Pacific Northwest. And we'll go ahead and give you an example here. So again, this is a screenshot from the story map. So the agroforestry practice that I'll be talking a little bit about is silval pasture. And so how we see that appear in a tribal forestry context would be integrating like native ungulates, like you could say mountain goats, bighorn sheep, elk, deer, even domestic livestock, like what you're seeing there in that photo to the left, and using that to cultivate different foods or medicines that the tribe or the community particularly wants. And so in this case, what you're looking at here are hogs that are being used to graze in a tan oak forest. The hogs will also be processed and used for food and other things. And the tan oak here are the tan oak mushrooms in particular, which only grow in tan oak forests, are culturally significant and also an important food for many of the tribes in Northern California. I believe this particular photo was taken on in outside of Orleans, which is near the Karuk, Hupa, and Yurok tribes. But I think it's closest to Karuk and Hupa. And so again, there are additional examples here, and I guess I already mentioned this, but we're highlighting right now the Indigenous fire stewardship. So when I talk about Indigenous fire stewardship, and this information is adapted from the story map, is that fire stewardship is landscape in scale, and the practices are applied from the coast all the way to the interior. So Indigenous fire practitioners worked with both natural ignitions, and they still may work with natural ignitions to create a desired regime. It's a tool or a management tool, and many ecosystems, as are in the Northwest, right, are fire dependent. And so one thing I do want to call out here, when it comes to fire management, I know Mark had provided some questions early on about partnering with tribes that you all, I guess, may have like solicited to Mark, and he then gave it to me. But something to just keep in mind is that, like, right, tribes are not a monolith. Our cultures are not a monolith. My tribe is from Southeast Arizona, and we may have different fire practices and or just different fire practices than what other tribes in the Southwest region may have, but also right, it differs greatly from tribes in the Pacific Northwest, not only because our ecosystems are different, but our cultures are different. So that there's a diversity of Indigenous fire stewardship within our Pacific Northwest region. And so we just need to be careful in our partnerships and really listen to the tribes on what their relationship is with fire, how they've used fire in the past and also present, and how they want to use it in the future to steward their lands. And that there's a variety of different knowledge systems, as well as agroforestry practices that are informing the use of fire as a management tool in the landscape. Okay, coming to the end here. So now I guess we're going to be kicking off this project, I guess in a week, as Bodega mentioned, and moving forward for the next 5 years. I guess it's like four years and some change there. But we are going to be building a community of practice for tribal agroforestry producers. So this is building on the participants from the webinar, as well as the roundtable discussions. And we will primarily focus in year one on establishing and formalizing that community of practice, as well as conducting a needs assessment. And I'll get to that a little bit more in a bit. Another project, so that's our first project goal. Our second project goal is to build upon the knowledge and experiences of tribes and Indigenous producers in the region to better collaborate with the USDA. So increasing the full participation of tribes with USDA programs and services related to agroforestry. And something that I want to mention there, so that will be the needs assessment. That's also, I think, is better understanding like how agroforestry projects are funded. And so what are the opportunities out there that tribes can tap into? Who are the partners? So I'm looking to you all in the room here that we can connect tribes with and Indigenous agroforestry producers with in order to increase the adoption of agroforestry practices and get agroforestry practices, I guess, increase the knowledge and awareness of agroforestry practices that are out there. That's what I'm trying to say. And then the third goal of this project is to utilize tools. So in this case, we'll be focusing on FES, which is a forest vegetation simulator. It's a growth and yield modeling tool for forests. And so how do we adapt this tool so that tribes can better predict and model what their forests will look like and manage their forests, for all the different agroforestry practices that they want to and the outcomes that they yield. And so this tool, it's not fitted, for, may not be, there's not like a, what am I trying to say? With this tool, right, it may take inventory from all over the Pacific Northwest. And so we want to work with multiple tribes to better fit that tool so that we yield more accurate outputs for them. So we want to work with their inventory data if that's what they wish, or we could even feed in like regional CFI plot data too. And I don't do the calibration, but there, my team, my Forest and Ecosystem Services team will be doing that. So those are our goals. So the partners, we have a wide variety of partners here. And I believe actually we need to put Oregon State University back on there because Bodega is back working at Oregon State University. So that modeling component that I talked about, that will be a pilot project with the Hoopa Valley Tribe. We are also working with Cal Poly Humboldt, Washington State University Extension, and Heritage University. Heritage University is a private university on the Yakama Nation. And these three universities are going to be helping us develop tribal agroforestry specific lesson plans, delivering them to high school youth through a pilot program out of Heritage University. And then at Cal Poly Humboldt through their food sovereignty lab, we will be placing undergraduate interns in research and development. I guess, well, there's plot monitoring and ground truthing and all the fun stuff of getting out into the field in Northern California to support this project. And so with the needs assessment, the one thing I do want to highlight is just that we will be identifying Indigenous agroforestry projects. So kind of just figuring out who's doing what in the Pacific Northwest. And then also what, asking producers, having them define, like what are their technical assistant needs? What are those unique gaps and also the barriers that they are encountering in accessing USDA programs and services? And as I mentioned earlier, that year 2, the agroforestry lesson plans, as well as the internships and the FES modeling that'll be taking place like year 2 onward. So 2020, probably later 2024 throughout the end of the project. And I'll go ahead and pause there. I know I just want to do a time check with Mark or Patrick. How much time? I'm good. Okay.
Yeah, you got plenty of time.
All right. Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit, and I just wanted to close out the next few minutes of this presentation talking about partnerships, because I know that was a question that was raised and asked. And so what you're looking at here, it's a photo of Roy Ammon and Alicia Flores. Alicia is now working with the BIA, but when this photo was taken, both of them work for Hoopa Valley Tribal Forestry Program. This site has had prescribed burns, so fire reintroduced back to this landscape. They've thinned this site, and the purpose of this was to manage the site for basketry materials. So there's hazel in the background there. So that's an example of a tribal agroforestry project that currently exists today. As far as partnerships go, what I did want to mention is that Native representation in this field is really important. So outreaching to Native, or I guess like Indigenous agroforestry producers, like what we, when we were, I guess, convening the roundtable discussions, a lot of these folks did not think of themselves as agroforesters, or that they were an agroforestry producer. They're like, oh, I work in forestry, or I work for the cultural department, or I work in youth education. And so I think that's one of the early things we learned in our collaboration together with our partners, including tribal partners, is that I think broadening and raising awareness of like the understanding of what agroforestry is, as well as what it can look like, the possibilities of what it can look like, that'll really help us build out this community of practice, and also to connect tribes with resources so that they can manage the land and steward it in the way that they want to. And so this is an example of the partnership, I guess, that we have with Hoopa is an example of, Roy, he works in timber sales, and he was like, I'm not an agroforester. And it's like, well, you're thinning. And then we're trying to promote we're trying to promote hazel to grow in this site, and hazel's used for basketry. And then we started talking about tan oak mushrooms, and he's like, oh, I didn't think about that as agroforestry. And then how this relationship was formed, how we built this relationship with Hoopa, and why I say like hire Native folks into the positions that you have is, Alicia and I, we went to grad school together. And so we had this existing network, and she went and worked back for her home tribe. I continued my work at a nonprofit, but now we're able to collaborate across those different entities, so that relationship that we have is really important. I think also too, one of the things I know that makes me feel comfortable working in like a nonprofit space is just having other Native folks around who understand my, I guess, like culture, community, knowledge and beliefs, and different tribal protocols even, and I know that may sound scary if you don't know it, but I think really like asking questions is okay. Reaching out, and the biggest thing that I can say is showing up. If you get invited to a community, like a clam bake or a feast or a salmon ceremony, like show up. So the more that you can participate in these community-wide events, the more or the better the relationship you will have with tribal partners. And I know the Kalispel tribe in particular, who we recently just finished a video with about they're managing their community forest for a variety of different purposes. They, one of the things that their natural resource department mentions is that they're managing not just for their community, their tribal community, but they're also managing for the larger community that they're connected with too. So they do host a lot of community events that you could attend. This next slide is a photo of Jesse Beers. He's the cultural stewardship manager with the Confederated Tribes of Kuzla, Umpqua, and Sayusla Indians. This is from another video that we produced with the Sayusla Watershed Council. And the reason why this is here is because I think out of this video series, one thing that we highlighted, food's at the center of a lot of like the food, and culturally significant plants, animals, and fungi are at the center of any sort of the management that CCPLUSI is striving for. And the diverse partnership networks that they have, watershed councils, foundations, nonprofit entities, even some unlikely partners, right? Like small local businesses, restoration, or people who work, out in the forest and are working in timber. They may, that heavy machinery, that same heavy machinery is used for restoration projects, and so you'll get a variety of folks working together, and I can share out this video series too. I think it does a great job explaining the diverse partnerships that are needed to address Indigenous, or to, I guess, center Indigenous stewardship on this land. And then the last, well, I guess I already talked a little bit about the Kalispel tribe, but I did want to just put a plug in here for the Kalispel tribe. They are great partners. Like I said, they host a lot of community events. Their community forest, you can visit. There's a little forest walk that explains different foods and cultural resources associated with all the different types of trees and the plants that are found in the forest. And something else that we do that I didn't get to talk too much about today is, again, thinking about that Native representation, right? If we're thinking about the next generation of youth that we want to train and recruit and retain into the field of agroforestry, there needs to be curriculum, videos, and opportunities that are that youth see themselves in, right? So having Native representation in learning materials and having Native representation for learning opportunities is really important. I worked with it was a urban and community forestry project, and I tried really hard to find videos about in urban forestry about connections to trees that I felt that the youth that I was working with who were Native would connect with, and I really couldn't find any out there. And so we had to create our own. And so that's just something to, like, I heard there's a lot of talk about creating curriculum, and so just including as many diverse voices, and making sure that you're thinking from a youth's perspective, like, do I see myself in this? Would I want to be a part of this in the future? How can I help? And so that's my my presentation today on our project. I do have a list of resources for you linked in the slide deck, just to learn more about tribal agroforestry. And our webinar and story map are linked there as well. And that is it. So I'll go ahead and stop the screen share. And I'm here, if anybody wants to ask a question.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was awesome. Really appreciate that. A lot of great information there. I think this population's been sorely missing. I'll turn it over to folks. I can monitor the chat, or if folks want to just chime in and just ask Stephanie some questions. Now is the time.
I have a question. If folks can hear me, hello. I'm Rachel. I work at Cloud Mountain Farm Center, and I work in the nursery. And could you talk a little bit about, I saw the Intertribal Nursery Center or Network on there. Could you talk a little bit about that? And if there's, any way other nurseries can support that?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking about that. So also, fun fact that I think I just want to mention about the Intertribal Nursery Council. So they're the first intertribal org when I was a student back like 15 years ago when I was an undergrad. They reached out and they had a scholarship to have Native students attend their intertribal nursery workshops. So I think like that's something there. Like, I mean, I think if you can direct resources, whether that's like your organization sponsoring a Native student, or reaching out to the Intertribal Nursery Council, and the person who leads that work is Jeremy Pinto, and he's out of the University of Idaho in Moscow. I think that's like an easy request, and yeah, it was kind of cool because I mean I haven't talked to Jeremy since that since I went there like 15 years ago, and it was great to be we showed up in the same meeting room when Bodega outreached and, was asking if I could join their project. So that was cool to see it kind of come full circle there. But I can paste their website in the chat for you. And I know that they host a variety of like workshops and symposiums. There is also I just downloaded it today. It is, I want to get this right. I'll come back to it, but I know that there's a nursery manual that was shared with me. That was, I believe it's like a native plant nursery manual. And here is the link to the Intertribal Nursery Council.
I have a question if no one else does. I know you haven't done the needs assessment yet, but I'm just kind of curious what your perception of it is ahead of time, like as what are the barriers to adoption that tribal members and indigenous community members are facing, and kind of what's the overlap there with non-tribal members as well?
Yeah, I mean, so I think I kind of want to take a step back. And I mean, before we're talking about barriers, I think is better understanding and reaching out to tribes to again, right, increase awareness of what are the different types of agroforestry practices and how does that translate into the stewardship practices that I'm already doing. So I think tribes are actually already participating in agroforestry. It's just from like a Western lens or a mainstream lens, right? We may not be aware of the different practices that would actually count towards agroforestry. It's one of the main reasons why I'm most interested in agroforestry though, is because I feel like there's so many things interconnected. And I think that really resonates with tribal partners too. In the roundtable discussions, as soon as we were talking about how agroforestry, it's holistic, regenerative. It's at a landscape scale. It incorporates and integrates, ranching, cattle, like different plants, cultivating little berry patches, like it has indigenous fire included in it. I think as soon as tribes hear that, they're really excited, like, oh wait, this is actually, it's not being exclusive, it's being inclusive of how I'm practicing my, stewardship on this land. As far as barriers go, I think like the first thing that we're going to encounter, like when we see it, like expanding agroforestry practices, like out at a larger scale, or adopting indigenous agroforestry practices at a larger scale, is tribal capacity. So I think not only like tribal staffing, but just like with COVID, tribes have been hit really, really hard. And I recently completed a tribal forestry workforce development needs assessment. And I interviewed folks from almost 30 different tribes, and many, like I remember many tribes, mentioned tribal capacity as the main issue. And then just to put a finer point on like what that looks like is you have one person in a job, they leave. And then so someone has to take on that job. So you have another staff member doing 2 jobs, and then they get overwhelmed and they're like, I can't do this. And then so they quit. And then all of that work then gets put on somebody else. Like, so then you have, one person doing 3 jobs. So it's just this overwhelm. I think also with all of the funding that is out there right now, funding isn't necessarily an issue. It's the hoops that tribes have to jump through to access funding. And I also think that it's, I think that more money should go directly to tribes for their forest and agroforestry management practices. Many tribes, they have a trust relationship with the government. They may have a trust relationship with the BIA then too, or I say may because there's always some loophole, I feel like that. So I try not to speak in absolutes here. But the BIA would then the Bureau of Indian Affairs would then have to approve any management practices. They're the ones that distribute the funds. And so just things take a long time. A lot of that funding, even though we're seeing it out there in the world right now, it takes a lot of time to get to the tribes to actually like get on the ground and to contribute and support the practices that they're doing. So I think as we could just do stipends, cut checks, as much as we can, get funding directly to tribal practitioners. And then as far as like partnering, I think in addition to that funding, there's so much funding opportunities out there right now. I think there's a lot of partnership opportunities. So tribes can, they can be selective on who they partner with. And so I think that there's a lot of trainings and resources out there available to you to how to learn how to partner with tribes or be a good partner with tribes. I know that the Indigenous Wellness Institute, let me say that, let me make sure I'm saying that right. But I know that they offer Native Wellness Institute. I know that they offer a lot of trainings to folks. And I believe that there's, trainings on tribal law and policy out of University of Washington as well to look into. Indian Land Tenure Foundation, I'm gonna actually drop that in the chat right now. That's a great place to start to better understand allotments and the history of land dispossession of land that tribes deal with or have dealt with. So
I think, if you allow me to add, the need assessment is very important for this new project because we want to have a benchmark, what do we know, what kind of agroforestry practices are available, and what are the indigenous agroforestry practices which were not documented so far. So this need assessment will help the project to set up the baseline for the project, and moving forward, we can evaluate how much progress we made, and there are agroforestry practices which are not in the common scientific agroforestry list, then that will be a new discovery for the group. So.
Anybody else? We just have a few minutes left. Anybody have thoughts or comments? Okay. I think Stephanie, you're so amazing. You just silenced everybody. So thank you. Appreciate your time and effort and energy, and the work that you're doing is, I think, very valuable to a lot of people. And I, for one, just really thankful that you're doing it. I know it's not a singular effort. You're just a spokesperson right now. There's a lot of people behind you and supporting you, and you're supporting them. So thank you.
Great, thanks everybody. And I'll drop my information in the chat, and feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up questions. And I'll send along that slide deck to Mark too, to share out with you all.
Yep, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie.
And this is just a reminder too that, yeah, at 3, we're kind of at time, but we also have an extra half hour built in for networking and information sharing and that kind of thing, if you're interested in hanging out and discussing amongst each other. So we can start to transition into that if people are ready for that.
I have one thing that I wanted to share. And it's a potential opportunity for partners, for those on the line, particularly that provide technical assistance to forest and farm owners. I've been working for the last couple of years actually now with a gentleman by the name of Norm Dick, who started the Carbon Capture Foundation. And this is just a guy with a good heart, really, that's concerned about climate change. That's how it started. And he had some funding that he wanted to basically subsidize tree plantings in areas where forests didn't previously exist. So afforestation, that was his whole thing. And he didn't know anything about forestry. That's how he reached out to me. And I've been working with him ever since to get connected with landowners. So far, mostly it's been reforesting old prairies, like hay fields that have gone derelict and unused for years, mostly with native timber species. But I've been talking with him about agroforestry and sort of slowly warming him up to the idea of buying, maybe subsidizing non-natives, helping farmers plant things like chestnuts or other trees. And he's been really interested, and I was hoping he would be able to make it to the meeting today to talk a little more. But so I'm happy to share that sort of soft announcement in his place. I don't want him to have to drink from a fire hose, but for those of you that have projects, and maybe you're short on funding, particularly when it comes to seedlings, this is a potential opportunity. And so you can reach out to me and I can get you connected with him. But he seems very eager to get involved with agroforestry in some way. I think mostly because of the additionality of it in terms of carbon and carbon sequestration, but also because of the potential food community benefits as well. So I think he kind of was excited about the dual benefits of that. But yeah, anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. You all have my email because I'm the one that pesters you with emails about this meeting. So
Following up on that, I've been getting to know a group out of Stanford called Working Trees that's trying to do a very similar thing, and by working on payment for carbon offsets for new silvopasture and alley cropping in particular, trying to reduce the cost barrier to entry for farmers getting into agroforestry. And I'm happy to make some connections there as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I've been kind of, at least with my ear to the ground, on opportunities for small forest owners, which has been difficult enough. I haven't heard much in this area about carbon credits for farmers in agroforestry. So I'd be curious to hear more if there's anything regional, or if anyone else knows about opportunities like that. Because obviously that's a great non-timber forest product that farmers could take advantage of.
They're specifically trying to target smaller landholders who haven't been able to access carbon markets just because of size, and trying to bring some technology tools into for measurement and whatnot to allow that to happen.
Great.
Rand, can you share your email or a link to that org in the chat if we wanted to follow up with you on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put my email in there, and I'll see if I can quickly get to their website.
And Patrick, with the org that you mentioned, so they're providing free trees?
Yeah, up till now, they have either provided seedlings completely for free or subsidized them up to like 80%. And have also in some cases provided like volunteer planting parties.
Oh,
Yeah.
labor could be a really good, yeah.
I don't know enough. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a very casual, it's not a very formal thing. You call up Norm and say, hey, I have a project, and he'll say whether or not he's got the funding. They are a nonprofit though. I believe they have a 501c3. But it is, it'll probably be more of a case-by-case basis thing. And with agroforestry, I'm really not sure how it'll look, because usually the seedlings, they're going to be a little more expensive if we're talking chestnuts and things like that. So maybe the projects have to be smaller, or maybe it's a lower subsidy rate. I'm not sure. Any other announcements from around the
Or topics of discussion? Anything?
So this is Rand Hagenstein again with Interlace Commons, and we're a relatively new, very small nonprofit, and I'd be interested in just tracking how development and growth of the nonprofit you've just created for the Northwest is going. And I think there's sort of a few nonprofits in this space. Savannah Institute will be a good one in the Midwest. Appalachian Sustainable Development is another that we're working with. And I think just kind of connecting around the country with organizations that are trying to advance the same body of practice would be a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to stay connected on that for sure. We're obviously very early. I think the ink is still fresh on our business license.
Yes, it is.
But,
yes, we're in early process. The board is navigating its way down the road here, but absolutely, want to make those connections and have those conversations.
Yeah. So, Hollis, I don't know if you're on, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but after our last meeting, you sent me an email with a topic of discussion. And I stuck to my word, and I made a reminder to bring it up. And I don't know if you want, I have it here if you want me to read it. But if you want,
please do, because it left my mind exactly what it was.
It's been 2 months. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I kind of figured. But no, I thought it was a really good question. And just to kind of summarize it, the basic idea was getting some feedback from all the folks here on how their experience with how policy has interacted with agroforestry implementation, whether for good or bad. And your example was being on a site visit with a landowner who has designated forest land, which for those of you that aren't familiar, designated forest land is a tax deferral program that incentivizes managing land for timber production in Washington state. And then there's, well, I forget what it was exactly, but you're saying that there was some interference there with the ag designation.
Yeah, I can chime in real quick from there.
Okay.
So there's a gentleman on Whidbey Island that has about 60 acres, and most of it's in timber, but he has some pasture as well as a large pond and some residential sites. He manages it as a bed and breakfast, but has most of it in designated forest land and intends to keep it a working forest. But one thing he ran into was any trees that came in on his pasture land, as that was designated ag land. Essentially, they were like, you can't have trees there. You know, if it's ag land, you can't have trees there, and it's an incompatible use. And it was essentially, the way I understood it, the way the land use rules were written for their programs was that any ag and timber were mutually exclusive, that there wasn't any room for silvopasture or something like that in this designated use. So anyway, I was just curious if anyone else was aware of examples of where it, you know, if there's specific conflicts that people are aware of or areas where it's working well.
Yeah, it's a big question. And I know we have some folks from conservation districts on here that probably have, well, including you, Carrie, but more experience than I do. But my only experience with that has been in silvopasture and some more rural counties, and just expressed hesitance from assessor's offices about any, managing for anything other than timber on those lands. And the I don't know if it was an actual whack that they cited, but it was, the basic idea was, if you are getting income from that land other than timber, then it's no longer timberland. So if you're raising livestock in forest land, then your primary source of income from that land becomes the livestock, and it's no longer timber. And if you're not familiar with the designated forest land program, there are some pretty steep penalties that you pay for backing out of the program. It's like 7 years of back taxes or something like
9
that.
years.
9 years, yeah. So that can be a lot of money, and it can scare people away from engaging in the practice. That said, I've been in other counties where they've worked with their assessor's office one-on-one, and they kind of don't care. So it feels like it's this individual interpretation. And I don't know, Carrie, if that's been your experience too, or anyone else wants to chime in, but it seems to kind of depend on the county.
Yeah, I know. Go ahead, Carrie.
No, I found that too, that it seems to be pretty county specific. And I know, like in Snohomish County, we've actually approached the county on agroforestry practices in different ways, especially around riparian forest buffers, and had, some good negotiations. So that can be done per county. And at Kelsey, it looks like you're on, and Kelsey's from Whidbey Island. So she may be able to speak to what's going on Whidbey Island specifically too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I do think, Patrick, you make a good point that it's dependent a bit on who is in the position at the assessor's office and how they interpret the program. But this has come up before in folks I've worked with DFL. I feel like there is potentially some opportunity there, especially seeing as most of those staff are not trained in forestry. They're all mostly administrators, and so they're going to lean a lot on the professional arguments of the folks writing these plans for landowners and operators. I know in my experience, the language is for GFL specifically, it says that the land must be used primarily for growing and harvesting of timber. I think the key word is primarily. At least has been my experience. There's a couple instances where I remember writing forestry plans for this program where there were some minor cattle grazing in a forest setting that was able to be entered into that program, or I think it was a continuance situation where transfer of ownership happened, and we had to update that. So I think a lot of it is the relationships you build with your with the regulators, with the folks who administer these programs. And if you're coming at it from your technical background, they're gonna, and you have like a valuable way to make the scientific argument, there could be a lot more potential flexibility there, so long as it's, again, still true to that program's definition. But it seems like the verbiage even in the WAC is flexible. But I'm a conservation district staff member. That's just my own experience. I'm not a regulator.
Yeah.
I think this really speaks to a lot of work that still needs to be done with educating about what agroforestry is, that it's a multifunctional land use, right? Because I think a lot of our various levels of government are still in that, as Stephanie kind of expressed it before, this siloed way of looking at the landscape. And so, yeah, I think that's work that still needs to be done, and that we should all be thinking about how we take that on in various ways, whether it's the way we write technical reports for landowners, or whether it's actually educating some of these county level governmental staff and things like that, actively inviting them to participate in education events and have conversations, so that we can get into this space where we're looking at our landscapes more holistically and at their abilities to be multifunctional, and get, yeah, I mean, that's a long road to walk down, but I think that's a direction that agroforestry certainly wants to go, and we should be going. And it can be a matter of having to tackle each county as it comes up. Some are more open already than others too. So there are some counties and local governments that are already kind of down this road, but there's certainly a lot more work still to be done with a lot of different levels.
So I'll chime in real quick too, as the self-proclaimed WAC expert for the forest practice rules in the group. The definition of forest land as it is in the forest practice rules, I don't think is incompatible with agroforestry, simply because to be part of agroforestry, provided your trees are timber trees and not fruit or nut trees, it just has to be capable of supporting a commercial crop of timber. And so it doesn't matter if it's, mixed use, or if you have, it's not fully stocked for as, stocked as it possibly could be for growing timber, it still meets that definition. And so I think that there shouldn't be issues with that. And forest land management, it's not a conversion necessarily to reduce stocking to accommodate other uses. So that's something that you guys can I think go back to as you think about the legal definitions, but it is all mixed jurisdictional as well.
Yeah, and I think it pays to invite the assessors to these workshops and stuff. It's paid for me in forestry workshops, rather than like taking them by surprise after the fact. Probably, I think that's maybe most likely when you're going to get no's. But engaging them along with the process. So I think that was a good point that you made, Carrie. And Hollis, I'm super glad that you're here and willing to explain wax to us, because I don't like reading those. But I have to say, your example was the first time I heard of the inverse of that, with the ag designation saying no trees.
Right.
And I don't know if you dug into any of the rules on that. Is there any basis there in that program, or is that just a county interpretation, or even just an individual's interpretation of that?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's anecdotal. I didn't find the definitions of the land use program or used in land use programs, but yeah, that was something that was interesting, stuck out to me.
Yeah.
Another thing I have run into as far as the inverse, where you have open ag land and are trying to insert trees, and there can be cultural pressures that get in the way, and sort of norms within the surrounding community of avoiding, and it doesn't necessarily even matter what kind of trees you might be trying to put in or what kind of practice, but I've run into instances where sort of the surrounding cultural norms of the area really frown upon any types of trees in an agricultural field in any way. So that's another, I mean, there's regulation and there's culture and there's, social pressure as well, when we're looking at barriers and pressures to adopting agroforestry. So that's another level that I've run into. Just throwing that out there. That's another level of consideration. Sometimes it's the regulations may allow it, but it's the neighbors and the social norms of the area that don't allow it, or that need to be, addressed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's a opportunity for Thurston County, at least. They've got funding to redo all of their working lands policies at the county level. So there's an opportunity there, Patrick, for us to be communicating with them about that type of work and how that would fit in.
Yeah, who was the person? Do you know the contact for that? I believe
Yeah,
invited
Dana
her.
Bowers is who I've
That's right.
been talking to. Yeah.
Yeah, she's on the listserv for this work group, at least. I don't know if
Okay.
she has attended yet, but that would be great to work together and provide some input on that.
Cool.
And that's definitely a role that Agroforestry Northwest can play as well. If you are all running into various levels of regulation on landscapes you're working on, we can definitely be helping to have these conversations with different levels of folks. And the funding that I announced at the beginning of the work group session here, we do intend to sort of reach out to as many types of agencies and regulatory levels and things like that as possible, and get their attendance in the workshops or symposiums that we put on as well, just to expand awareness and conversation about land use and regulation and all of that.
Well, anything else for the good of the group?
Oh, I do want to mention one other thing. I just thought of something. The Sustainable Farms and Fields funding, especially if you're a CD person. I have found that can be a really great way if you have landowners interested in agroforestry. a really great source of funding to get some agroforestry funding for landowners. It can fund trees, it can fund labor, it can fund technical assistance time from you all. And they are going to open up another round of funding, I think May 1st, in early May. So just to have that on your radar and keep that in mind. If you have landowners that have been reaching out that are interested in that. And if you're not a CD person and you have landowners you're talking to, you can contact your local CD, or you could contact Mark or Patrick or I, and we could put you in touch with the right folks to access that funding as well. So just want to put that out for everyone.
There going to be a deadline for that, or is that like a rolling basis?
They will have a deadline. So it is kind of a rolling funding that they put out, but they do it in chunks. So they'll release another funding round like in early May, and they'll have a deadline on it. They'll probably, it's good to think about it now, because they'll probably give you like 2 or 3 weeks to submit a package. So kind of just thinking about it. And then, then they'll come out with another round of funding in 6 more months or whatever it is. So it kind of just goes in waves.
One other thing I wanted to chime in on, if anyone has situations where they want help understanding, the forest practice rules or the state regulations in regarding to timber harvest, timber management, stuff like that, that's very much my wheelhouse. That's what I do. So please reach out anytime.
And you're regional, right, Hollis? Can you go anywhere?
I'm regional. I cover Northwest region, but I'm more than happy to field calls after anybody. So that's fine.
Nice.
That's great, because we're hoping to move more into forest farming and get our feet wet in that practice a little more and look at that a little more intensely. So it'll be great to have your knowledge as we start to delve into that world more. Any other questions, comments to share?
I am new here, but I just wanted to say thank you. It's really nice to listen to this group talk and get my boots wet in this work.
Thank you. Yeah, and where are you joining us from, Kristen?
Yeah, I am in Castle Rock, Washington, and I'm a landowner, I guess is what you would call it. I'm not affiliated yet, although I did get Jennifer from the VSP to come out today, which was an awesome meeting with her. And I think Patrick's going to come out in a month or so. And yeah, just we do very, very, very small scale, like family scale, rotational grazing of our pigs and all kinds of other things here. And we're kind of transitioning, old timberland that hasn't been managed into a silvopasture, but there's so much that I feel like I have learned. And then also there's the practice, right? And figuring out what are the right trees that we might slowly replace some of these old trees with, not necessarily old trees, but trees that have been planted or not managed. So it's just, I'm trying to soak up anything I can at this point.
Great. I'm glad you could make it.
Yeah, thank you.
Looking forward to the site visit as well.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Hopefully it won't be so rainy when you're here.
Yeah.
Very tired of the rain.
I just wanted to echo Kristen's same thing. My name is Joe Williams. I'm actually with the USDA, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, our Soil Health Division. But I'm based here in Olympia, Washington, and I've got a colleague on the line as well too. And this is my second meeting in attendance. And so again, appreciate it. Love all the good work that everyone's doing. And look forward to participating and coming to more additional meetings. So just want to introduce myself.
Thanks, Joe. Great.
And I hope that we have a chance to all get together in person at some point. We are still considering an in-person meeting, but I know we're pretty scattered. Obviously, Rand, you're in Alaska, so I won't start your attendance, but you know, I mean, it's worth considering, even if we could just get out on the ground and like kick the dirt and see something interesting related to agroforestry. I really like this community, and I think it's a great way to get ideas and get partnerships and push this thing along. So I hope everybody continues to attend as best you can. We're gonna have another meeting in June. We'll probably skip the August one. I think we decided to do that last year because everyone's in the field.
Yeah.
But then come back in September or October.
And we did, I do want to put it out there too. You can always contact us. We did early in the year put out a survey of topics you guys wanted to discuss or that you had interest in. If you did not get to participate, feel free to contact us with, you know, if you have certain topics that you'd love to discuss with the group, or like Hollis came and said, hey, I ran into this, can we talk about it? Always feel free to reach out with topics, guest speakers that you might be interested in. You know, you're always welcome. We're always looking for that feedback and information from you. So feel free to reach out to any of us at any time with ideas or requests or any of that.
One more quick question for the group. Next month is the Society of American Foresters state meeting. Is anyone planning on attending besides myself by chance?
I'll be there.
Who is that?
I'm Margaret. I'll be
Margaret. Oh, okay, great. I look
We'll
forward
see
to
you
meeting
there.
Awesome. I don't think we have any presentations on any agroforestry topics this year, but as stuff comes up, if you guys have case studies or interesting topics you think would be worth expounding on, we definitely can get people in touch with planners to have you guys present at state meetings. So I think it'd be awesome. I don't work directly enough with examples to be able to do that myself, but I'd love to connect you guys with that.
Ah, that'd be great. I can't make it this year, but I am going to try to attend next year. And yeah, if there was something you wanted me to talk on one of the various projects, I'd be happy to. Or help find someone that could as well. So we can maybe work on that later.
Yeah.
I know the state SCF, the one presentation topic that might be related is there was going to be a field tour or the mill tour for the Pacific Tone Woods for the figured maple topic. So I think if we're talking like maple syrup, maple production, or specialty wood products, that kind of ties into the agroforestry side.
Yeah, I'm super excited for that field tour.
Yeah, that's a cool project. Well, should we call it here, Carrie?
Yeah, sure. If we're good. Well, thanks everyone. And we look forward to, let's see, our June meeting, I guess will be our next one. And we'll send out information about that to everybody. And we'll see you all in a couple months.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.